The United States and its allies, and even some of its enemies, spent years trying to find and eliminate the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Finally, they found him in a heavily fortified compound in northern Syria, and now he's dead. This is purported to be what's left of that compound after an overnight mission by U.S. Special Forces. They inflicted many casualties as they bombed and blasted their way into al-Baghdadi's hiding place, according to U.S. President Donald Trump, but took no casualties themselves. Trump held a news conference this morning to make the announcement. Here's how he described the terrorist leader's final moments.
He died after running into a dead-end tunnel, whimpering and crying and screaming all the way. The compound had been cleared by this time, with people either surrendering or being shot and killed. 11 young children were moved out of the house and are uninjured. The only ones remaining were Baghdadi in the tunnel, and he had dragged 3 of his young children with him. They were led to certain death. He reached the end of the tunnel as our dogs chased him down. He ignited his vest, killing himself and the 3 children. His body was mutilated by the blast. The tunnel had caved in on it in addition. But test results gave certain, immediate, and totally positive identification. It was him. He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place.
U.S. President Donald Trump describing the final moments for ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The CBC's Paul Hunter is in our Washington bureau with more on what Trump had to say. So obviously, Paul, a moment of triumph for Trump. Tell us more about this operation.
Yeah, well, according to Trump, it's been in the works, or it had been in the works, for about 2 weeks, reportedly based on intelligence from Iraq, and U.S. troops indeed moved in last night, late afternoon, early evening Eastern time, ultimately blasting their way into the compound. Their instructions were evidently to capture or kill al-Baghdadi. Evidently, U.S. troops shouted for him to surrender. He did not, and he fled into that tunnel, and you heard Trump's detailed description of what followed after that. The president thanked Russia, thanked Turkey, praised the work of U.S. Special Forces. He said forensics experts were indeed at the scene. They did tests right away. Here's a bit more from Trump on the raid and on al-Baghdadi's body.
Baghdadi's demise demonstrates America's relentless pursuit of terrorist leaders and our commitment to the enduring and total defeat of ISIS and other terrorist organizations.
Worth noting, it was a remarkable, lengthy description we had this morning from Trump on all of it. Unusual for any president to go into that kind of detail after such events. He called ISIS fighters losers and sick puppies, on top of all you played here off the top of the show. Say some inflammatory, boastful, but for Trump, driving home the key point for the president, he did it.
So, Paul, how big of a deal is this? How important was Baghdadi?
Well, about 30 or 40 minutes into Donald Trump's news conference, the president seemed to describe it as a bigger deal than the killing of Osama bin Laden. Some would argue that in this country, al-Baghdadi was perhaps, well, he was the most wanted man in the world, but he never really seemed to reach the status of bin Laden, not in this country anyway. That said, the killing of al-Baghdadi is a significant achievement for the president, strategically and politically. These are hard times for Trump, as U.S. president. Blocks from here, while that raid was being carried out, impeachment hearings were underway. Think about that. As for al-Baghdadi, look, he's the founder and the leader of ISIS. He was an enemy of America, and he's dead. That's no small deal. Here's how Republican Senator Lindsey Graham today described ISIS after word came of al-Baghdadi's death.
ISIS is a depraved organization that's ever existed in the history of the world. They're religious Nazis. They cannot be accommodated. They cannot be negotiated with. They have to be destroyed.
That said, Graham and others have noted that al-Baghdadi's death does not mean the end of ISIS. Far from it. The caliphate may not exist as it once seemed to have, but there remain thousands of ISIS fighters in the region, and the threat that thousands more may soon escape custody in the chaos of the Syrian-Turkish border these days. Calling it a work in progress is an understatement, but again, to be clear, the killing of al-Baghdadi is a big deal, a key achievement for the Trump administration and for the U.S. military.
Paul, thank you. The CBC's Paul Hunter in Washington. For more on what we should watch for in light of Baghdadi's death, we spoke with Michael S. Smith II. He's a terrorism analyst and a lecturer in Johns Hopkins University's Global Security Studies program.
Thus far, Islamic State has not acknowledged Baghdadi's death. So with an organization that is managing a so-called news service known as a mock agency in the case of Islamic State, you would think that it would want to be controlling the narrative on this and beating Donald Trump to the punch on describing him as dying like a dog, a scared dog, or whatever sort of hyperbole was used to describe this situation. I think that the way in which Baghdadi died is going to amount to a propaganda bonanza for Islamic State, in that he allegedly detonated a suicide vest, as Trump put it. I think it was probably more like a suicide belt, similar to one that was included as a prop set next to Baghdadi in a video that Islamic State released earlier this year featuring commentary by Baghdadi. So I think that it's, on the one hand, a bit problematic for the group in that the U.S. president is thus far controlling the narrative on this development. But on the other hand, the manner in which Baghdadi died will have an inspirational effect, probably for decades to come.
Well, let me ask you a little bit more about that, because tell me about what you thought about the president's tone, you know, when he described Baghdadi whimpering, that he died like a dog, like a coward, using this kind of language, that he took his young children with him. Is that helpful, or is that potentially concerning?
Well, it's Trump, and it's not, you know, surprising by any stretch. I would say that what is terribly problematic about his address, aside from his, you know, deficient strategic analysis of ways to fully undermine and disrupt the influence capabilities of Islamic State and other terrorist groups and extremist actors, is that Trump echoed his threat of dumping Islamic State members from Syria back into countries in Europe, notably the UK, France, and Germany, as he spelled out. And I think that that right there highlights that even after being president for many years, even at a point where he has green-lighted a intelligence and military operation against a foremost dangerous terrorist figure, he still doesn't understand the fundamentals of leadership. This was a moment where he could be using this accomplishment of sorts to shore up confidence in the United States government's capabilities to lead, particularly in the global security paradigm, and he dropped the ball on that.
And that was terrorism analyst Michael S. Smith II speaking to us from South Carolina.